Hello and welcome to episode 406 of the Crate and Crowbar, a gaming podcast being recorded on the 27th of September 2022. I'm Marsh Davis and I'm joined for this devilish episode by the archdemon himself, Jamie Britton.
Hello.
We have a slate of deeply evil games to discuss this evening. Several in which involve the horrific invasion of our reality by creatures from some other dimension, and one which epitomizes our own source of evil within our very own banal world. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely, it is. Yeah.
Where would you like to start? Would you like to start on Earth, or in space? Or it's wherever the I don't know, that new Devil Daggers style game is set. I don't know where that is.
Oh
Doesn't
yeah,
look nice though.
that game is set everywhere and nowhere. I think all at once. So yeah, I've been playing Hyperdemon, which is a new game. Came out in the last couple of weeks by the same developer as Devil Daggers. So they're called Soraf. They're pleasingly obscure. No one knows anything about them or who they are, or if it's one guy or a bunch of guys, or what really. I have fond memories of yeah, I have fond memories of Devil Daggers because one of the first things I heard talked about on a great podcast called Crate and Crowbar a few years ago, and everyone was bickering on that episode about their high scores. And I ended up buying it and realizing I wasn't even measuring up to the most modest high scores on there. But yeah, so Hyperdemon dropped out of nowhere, which I love. I love it when a game just takes you by surprise completely, and seeing on Twitter like, oh, it's Devil Daggers 2 essentially is just great. And it is Devil Daggers 2 in all but name. It has the same basic structure, a bunch of the same assets, even some of the same sound effects, but it is everything kind of multiplied by insanity. I mean, it's an extraordinary game, really. You're still, as in Devil Daggers, you have a sort of arm sword gun thing that you're shooting horrific beasties and trying to kind of get a high score. But beyond that basic structure, there's all sorts of kind of new mechanics and new ways of moving and new types of monster and stuff like that just turn it into an experience which is like Devil Daggers on drugs. And that is such a banal cliche, but I think this might be the one time it's absolutely the right one to use, because it is like you've accidentally ingested an entire Manson family party cult cache of drugs, and have been forced to play Nerf ball, and this is how your optic nerve is interpreting it through the visage of horrible hallucinogens, because it is such a colossal explosion of color and sound and perspective. There's got this kind of incredibly weird field of view mechanic, which I don't understand even slightly. And as in Devil Daggers, you are just plunged straight into quite literally hell, I think, and tasked with staying alive for as long as possible. It's distinct from Devil Daggers in some really interesting ways. One of the most interesting is that it doesn't just tick up as a survival game as Devil Daggers does. Devil Daggers is about staying alive for as long as you can. In Hyperdemon, well, first of all, it has an ending. So there is an ending that you can see. But also, it doesn't have a timer going up, at least not in the conventional sense. What it has is a timer that's perpetually going down, going into minus figures. And the more you kill, and the more you kill quickly and efficiently, your seconds are added onto the timer, which is kind of hard to explain, but it makes sense when you're playing it, that it's asking you to kind of be incredibly aggressive and tactical about how you're pacing yourself so that you can have those numbers ticking up. I mean, my record, I think, is 13 seconds. Wow. Someone on the Discord has 70 odd or something like that, 75, 76, I think. The world record, which I just watched on YouTube, is 330 seconds or something like that. Wow. And is almost completely impossible to watch without feeling like you're about to develop epilepsy. And you have a kind of you can switch this bit on and off, but you have a kind of par setting, so it will tell you if you're above and below your best timing for specific moments. But I find that far too stressful because it's always down, and you get this weird situation where you can sort of end up staying alive. Your numbers are high. If you die when your numbers are high, then your time is going to be better than if you die and you've just been playing really badly and your numbers have gone into the minus figures. So it's this really unforgiving, brutal scoring system
Hmm.
that kind of really challenges you to just give up. You just kind of like, well, it's really unforgiving. Um, and though the game itself, there's tutorials in it, which Devil Daggers itself never
Wow.
had. So
That doesn't seem somehow fitting with its
no,
whole vibe.
it's like the devil making you a sandwich before he commits your soul to hell. It's just like, right, if you finish, right, in you go. Um, but it's good because there's a bunch of stuff which was hidden in Devil Daggers, which you'd never know really unless you'd really kind of experimented with it, like how your bullets, your daggers bounce off the floor and stuff like this. In Hyperdemon, there's all sorts of stuff like you can sort of do an incredible rocket jump, which gives the game all sorts of verticality. You can also sort of body slam enemies, which propels you up into the air. It's got a lot more of a sense of height, this game. You're constantly being hurled skyward and charging into, disgusting geometric goblin monsters and exploding out of them, in a shard of light and butterflies and stuff like that. And it also has a laser gun that you can fire and gems to collect. And I mean, it's an amazing thing, and like it's a real hardcore game. It's a game for people who kind of hate themselves and want to sort of overwhelm themselves with horror, and try and kind of master that horror in order to beat a bunch of random people on the internet. I will never get anywhere with it, but it does well at like when you beat your own time, it shows you edging up the leaderboard with a little bit of ceremony, which I appreciate. You get a little bit of a pop to it, which again, Devil Daggers never had. It just kind of like matter
Hmm.
of factly, just did that. So there's like these like concessions to friendliness. Though I think, as Chris Thurston said, it does still feel like a game that's fallen out of a porthole through hell and is some sort of haunted Ring style video game from 1996 or something, And but yeah, it's great. It's a real experience, and I can't quite emphasize enough how disorientating it is to play, but how much fun it is when you get up a sense of momentum going. So
Am
like,
I right in thinking that you can sort of see behind you at all times? Like
oh
there's
yeah,
a field of view is like somehow 360.
yeah, and actually works really well. It's really intuitive in this kind of crazy way that when the beasties are encroaching, from behind, they appear in front of you, outlined in red, um, which sounds confusing, but just isn't actually. It makes a lot of sense. And actually, that was always a thing I didn't like about Devil Daggers was that the people that came in, the horrible monsters that kind of would come in behind you, it sometimes seemed a little bit unfair because you had to really have the sound up high to kind of, if you'd missed something like that. Whereas this game, yeah, obviates that problem. So again, there's this weird quality of life improvements uh, in what turns out to be probably a much more challenging game than its predecessor.
Hmm.
Um,
Is it still wave based? The first game, the longer you last, the more kind of different horrors you have to face. But in a game which isn't necessarily dependent on playing longer to be better, is it still? Do the enemies get introduced in that kind of orderly way still?
Yeah, I'm not sure actually. That's kind of a mysterious element to it because the with the timer mechanic, the faster you're killing and the more damage you're doing, and the more your seconds are going up. I know that increases the spawn rate of all the various monsters. So I think with Devil Daggers, it was always the same things would happen, and it
Yeah.
essentially was about being able to kind of choreograph your moves and recreate them. I think in this one, I expect that what they've done is taken away that as a crux and made it so the better you're doing, the more different a given run is going to be. That's my guess anyway, because definitely I know that that killing more causes more to spawn, and therefore, yeah, that suggests that there would be more variation across different runs. It does also kind of feel like dancing in a really mad way. It feels like you're learning a dance step, to be able to swivel yourself forward so that you can shoot at the ground and fire yourself up into the sky, and then shoot a bunch of beasties on the ground, and then like body slam yourself down, and then throw yourself across the level and collect a power up so you can fire your laser. It feels weirdly like chaotic nightmare line dancing. Yeah,
happy hardcore night at the Cardiff Rec.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely, yeah, it is. It's exactly that. So yeah, I really enjoy it, and I'll probably kind of often find with games like this, they're quite fun to like leave alone for months at a time and then come back to and have a play and then leave them again. I always found Devil Daggers really kind of, I just wanted to kill shit. It was a good game to fire up. It's also got that glorious like, you press the restart button, the game restarts. It doesn't mess around. Boom, there you go. Which I always.
It does look incredible. I felt like I was going to get a nosebleed just by looking at the trailer, so I haven't actually downloaded it yet. But I did enjoy Devil Daggers. I might give this a punt. But I don't know that I have it in me anymore, Jamie. I think my skills have atrophied to the point where these games are basically unplayable to me.
It's so compulsive. It's that thing where, edging seconds up, almost in that kind of. It's actually a lot like playing Super Hexagon. It's almost exactly the same vibe as that, where you're like, oh, just a little further, and then you go on tilt and you do like 10 terrible runs in a row. It's kind of got that same sort of thing.
Would you like to talk about the evil within, or the evil within your child's school?
Yeah, okay. I'll talk about the evil that lurks within my child's school. So my daughter is. I'm going to think for a moment. She's 6 years old, and she is at a primary school, very nice local primary school. And they are given, and as I understand it, this is fairly common, and I think this game is played across the country. She is given, as part of her maths curriculum, a game called Numbots. Now, Numbots is an app that you can play on a browser or on a phone or on a tablet, and what it is it's to help them learn their basic maths, and it has robot-themed maths puzzles, which at the stage she's at, and I've been playing it with her, are very, very simple. Show you two little nuts, as in nuts and bolts, that is, and it'll say how many are here, and you work your way through various levels. Now, I was kind of pleased by this when she first started playing it, because it's very well presented, it's very friendly. It's pleasingly kind of welcoming. I think robots is a good choice for children because they're there's none of the kind of gendered stuff that is often so everywhere with these things, and it's not pirates. Everything's fucking pirates these days. So I'm happy to see some robots, but investing the game a little bit, it's terrible, because what the game has is first of all, it has leaderboards, so you can see all of the children in your child's class, and globally all the children in the world playing this game, under pseudonyms. So they give your child a sort of robotic pseudonym and a robotic avatar called something like, Nutsy Bolts Armageddon Machine. It wouldn't be called that, but I couldn't think of anything. They don't have Lovecraftian names. And so you can see that, and they have their little robot avatars. And what you can do is, the more maths puzzles you solve, the more currency you earn that you can then spend on items of clothing and new bits of, what do you call that again, Marsh? Do you call them the what do you call it? I've completely blanked on the word that is the word.
You've erased it from my mind as well somehow. it was in my head as you started saying that, and then by questioning it, you reached into my brain and pushed it away.
Absolutely, yeah. I mind invaded you.
It's like superficials. Like, what is it? It's like Cosmetics.
Cosmetics, yes, cosmetic
Oh,
items. And God, what happened there?
God almighty,
Um,
shit, yeah.
cosmetic items for your robot, and so they've basically made Fortnite but with maths, and without the ability to like pay pay to win or pay for those things, which is good because it's it's all part of the school stuff. But
Mm,
I understand why they've made it that way because these things are very tried and tested, and there's a lot of kids love Fortnite and games like it, and that kind of essentially kiddie battle pass is it's probably the most obvious way to do this. But I think it's a bad thing to do this basically. Like I've been very careful about how much I've exposed my daughter to video games, and part of the reason for it is that I know very well how addictive they are, and particularly how addictive they are when they have a kind of false progression system in them which rewards repeated play. And just
mm,
because that's to the goal of teaching them maths, that doesn't mean it's all right. I think it's a way of learning that's purely transactional, that is just a little bit cynical and a little bit cheap. And I wish they hadn't done it that way. And I think it's tricky. I think educational software has a duty to not do the shitty things that video games do to ensnare children into a kind of gameplay loop, which will ultimately end in them spending some money. Again,
mm.
even for an educational purpose. So yeah, I was, and also of course because I'm such a fucking terrible game nerd myself, I can't help myself with it as well. I'm I let her have her allotted time on it, and then I can't help sneaking a look at the leaderboard, and then like, ooh, it's only like
You're like, 7 times 3 is 21. Yes, get in there. Get wrecked. 6-year-olds.
absolutely. Um, so yeah, it's so compulsive that even I am kind of locked into it, and also it just kind of, as a lot of these things are, and I think as most people who've tried to learn something through an app can attest, ultimately they're probably not the best teaching tools, really. I mean, how many people have actually learned a language from that owl? Um, I mean, possibly lots of people, but I do think that you probably need to be taught things by a person rather than a reward system for mice in a tube that in order to do these
Yeah, I think, well, you're talking about Duolingo there, which is the language learning gamified app. And I think to some extent the gamification, like all these things, are fine in certain quantities when kind of well tuned and well directed and in sync with the natural motivations that you have as a learner. But then there's a certain point at which the gamification of particularly Duolingo just clashes with its motivation, because it does things like um, damaging your level of progress in a way which is quite demoralizing. And I remember when I was using it a few years ago, it did things to sort of punish your inattention, or and because I was traveling across time zones quite a lot at that time, it wasn't very good at working out which day you had completed. And so
things.
sometimes it would say, yeah, you missed a day, and then it would knock you back all this way through its ranks. And actually I found that really, really disheartening. um, but in other ways, I guess it was drawing me through by giving me a set of goals to complete per day, which not so much about the kind of reward system, but in just a kind of structured, the kind of ways in which games can structure your learning, rather than necessarily kind of giving you positive feedback for doing so. But then, like you say, there's always a point at which it would be more useful just to, just to speak to people in a language, in a kind of more casual environment where you aren't being fed little peanuts for every correct verb. Um,
Yeah, I
yeah,
think I think it's a hard one because I think the idea of learning something from an app or something like that, it's kind of antithetical you- to kind of the way we think about learning generally. Like we generally think about learning in terms of it's something we do, um, in a discrete kind of block of time, that's in our day. We'll go somewhere and do it. Whereas when you have it on the iPad or on the phone, it's just kind of it's something that's always there, and they've made Numbots compulsive enough that you know it's so easy for parents to just hand their child an iPad, as I do and as we all do, give them some screen time to kind of give yourself a moment to think and breathe and have a sandwich. But again, it just butts up against the kind of the idea that education is something that you can have on a screen. It feels like it needs, like, the idea of like sitting down with your child and doing some reading or doing some homework with them feels very different to that. If that makes any sense, it
Mm.
feels like the way of having it in an app is just a little bit perhaps a bit of a false economy.
Yeah, I mean, it's hypocritical of me, as somebody who's played and enjoyed and written and made games for my entire life. But I do worry that the kind of the reward loops of games, which when kind of superimposed upon things in the real world, give people a false impression about how the real world operates. Because in reality, you're not constantly rewarded for for effort, and
Yeah,
games are very good about creating reward in exactly the right quantity for the amount of effort you put in. And in fact, there is not that kind of feedback loop in reality. And maybe certain tasks do not benefit from that illusion. I don't. When it comes to learning, like, obviously we can be high-minded about it and say, like, well, you should be learning for learning's own reward, and I'm sure that works with certain things because um, I know I feel like I would have been one of the main problems I think with kind of education as a child is that you don't know why you're learning any of the things that you're learning. And it's quite hard to sell kids on the fact that this stuff is intrinsically interesting. And then you come back to the subjects when you're like 30 or something like that, you find them fascinating because suddenly you've realized the value of that information and why it's interesting, and it's much easier to kind of motivate yourself to learn when you're older, even though your brain plasticity has completely and utterly gone south. But then I don't. But then what do you do about the subjects that nobody ever wants to learn? Like there are some things which are just not fun to learn. I know there are some people who really enjoy the beauty of maths, but I think for a lot of people it is it's utilitarian, right? I mean, you have to learn it because you're going to use it, not because there is a great deal of intrinsic pleasure in understanding the great beauty of maths. And then I don't know how you really how do you sell that to a child or an adult that that is something that they need to spend time working on and thinking about.
it's very hard, and I think my main issue really with it stems from the fact that watching my daughter play through the game is watching her just going through a kind of, so far, quite easy sort of rote series of repetitions where nothing's really going in. That's the thing. It just feels
Oh, right.
it feels a little bit because it's gamified and because it rewards you kind of tapping through and getting through to the next level. It also seems as an educational act just very 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 low impact because of that. I mean, I can imagine actually that for kids who have like certain barriers to learning or things like that, who don't have an easier in the classroom, it might be a really useful tool. I just think that generally it's too uh, the kind of rhythm of it is kind of hypnotic, and I think that's a bit of a problem.
Mm. Has she expressed a desire to have other things gamified? Like, is she frustrated when you read her a book because she's not getting hats out of it?
Oh my god, how terrifying would that be? To have to explain to her that in real life, if you want to get cosmetic upgrades, you have to go out and buy them, and it's a nightmare. Yeah, No, thankfully, I mean, it's again, it's funny because one of the first things they'll tell you if you're having, problems with your child in any way, behaviors or stuff like that, they will tell you to make a reward chart. That's the first thing anyone will say to you. Make a reward chart and show it to them, and every time they do a good thing, put a star on it, and at the end of it, they get a present. So you basically make a season pass for your house. Um, and give them unlockable awards as you go along. But that doesn't work with my child. It never has done. We never get anywhere. All we end up doing is focusing on the reward itself rather than the issue at hand. And maybe that's why Numbots doesn't seem like it's going to work for her, because she's a child who's very fixated on reward. Although, as I'm told, most of them are do that. But still, it's
Mm.
it's an interesting one because reward charts have never worked for us particularly well. Whereas I know other parents swear by them.
Could you see a way in which Numbots could be redesigned so that it would take out some of that kind of compulsive loop, but maintain some appeal in the fact it's basically a puzzle game? Do you think that's possible?
I think the leaderboards do something I don't like.
Yeah.
I think if the leaderboards weren't there and they'd slightly rethought how the kind of coin currency worked, I think I'd feel much more comfortable about building their own little robots. But the fact of the matter is they're put in a little market. They can compete with their friends. Um, there's no way to stop them from looking at their place on the leaderboards and looking at the other kids' robots and desiring, what the other kids have dressed their robots up as. So, I think that is the bit that made it all feel a bit unnerving to me.
Yeah. I don't. Yes, there are some things. I mean, there are many things in society in which competition is crowbarred into, but I really feel like learning maths is one one which does not require competition as a motivational factor. I've no, I mean, I'm particularly kind of averse to competition. Uh, I'm a very sensitive little boy, Jamie, and I don't like being beaten. But I also don't particularly like beating friends. I don't have too much of a problem with actually trashing a team of complete strangers via the internet. That's fine, but I never particularly enjoyed the kind of social tension of bettering somebody that you whose emotions you care about to some extent. I definitely don't like being beaten. So so the idea that you know you'd be motivated by being the sense of shame from being lower down on a leaderboard is doesn't seem like that would work for me, certainly.
Yeah, right. Because you can still see where you are on the leaderboard, and there's one kid on there who's got like 100,000 more points than the person in place two. So they're clearly someone who's played it a huge amount compared to everyone else.
Hmm.
Which is what leaderboards are like, isn't it? And I don't think he's hacked it. That's what people always say. It's like, oh, that person's hacked the game
Yeah.
to increase their score. I think that's
And I
probably
bet if you
unlikely.
were to poll the various kids on their level of motivation, you'd find very different answers from the top third of the leaderboard than you would from the bottom third, right?
Absolutely,
I mean, that's got to be
absolutely.
so demoralizing. What if you're the last kid right
Yeah,
at the
it's
bottom? You're
brutal.
like, well, okay,
Imagine you're
well,
that last kid. Just terrible. And of course, the thing is, this is the insidious thing. Like, you wouldn't be the last kid if you just kept playing, because the questions are easy enough and the game is brute forcible enough to actually not be good at distinguishing people at all. It's not a leaderboard of quality; it's a leaderboard of how much you've played the game, and that is a fault. Again, it's completely false. It's not who is best at maths, it is who has played the game most. And I'm not saying either of those things are I don't think they should be graded on how good they are at maths in a list when they are 5 and 6 years old. That seems Orwellian and nightmarish. But I also think that if you're going to do it, you better not just be pretending to do it. I think
hmm.
that's cheeky. Cheeky is the word.
Some would say cheeky, some would say evil, Jamie.
Evil, evil.
Evil.
God, imagine when voting's done this way. It's just
Oh
gonna be.
God. Yeah. Can I talk to you about another evil game?
Please do.
I'm going to talk to you about Prodeus or Prodeus,
I've been calling it
maybe
produce, which I imagine is like
produce.
is a is like a farmer's market simulator, which I definitely want to play now.
Yes. Well, I mean, calling it produce at least helps you distinguish it from Proteus, which is a very different game.
Yeah,
That's a first-person game about walking through nice fields, whereas Prodeus or Prodeus or Produce is a fucking bloodbath. So very different. Yes, you're just relentlessly dismembering and exploding creatures from hell or space or somewhere in between. Um, you're a soldier man, I guess. You've gone to a planet and you're going to fight back the forces of chaos, which are demons. They've invaded. That's bad. If that story sounds familiar to you, Jamie, or perhaps just extremely basic, then that's because Proteus is styling itself after the days of Quake and Doom, where men were real men and monsters were 2D pixel art sprites that had a very limited number of animations. The so-called boomer shooters out there, in fact, which I think is a very misleading name because I played Doom when it was fresh and new, and I'm not I'm not a boomer. I'm not part of the immediate post-war generation.
only a true boomer would deny his boomerness.
The innumeracy of that neologism aside, these games are trying to ape that frenetic, that sort of like the simple motivations, the style of ripping and tearing. That was all the rage back in the 1990s, and like they often opt for the same lo-fi technologies of that time because that partly alleviates the burden of development now, but it also sort of harkens nostalgically back to the aesthetic that was established by that era's limitations. Um, and a lot of them, and Prodeus included, also throw in modern affordances, like both graphical and mechanical. And I know this is a bit of a rabbit hole to go down, but I do want to talk about the way that Prodeus looks because it's very striking and weird in this regard because it's aping the Doom or Duke Nukem era of sprite based entities, which is to say that like enemies and items in the levels are represented by the like animated 2D pixel art. Within otherwise, like they're just planes of pixels within otherwise three-dimensional low poly environments. Um, but unlike Duke Nukem, it represents those sprites from quite a large number of different angles. So if you're standing over the crumpled pile of offal that used to be an enemy, you can sort of move to the left by some number of degrees, and the sprite will switch from being like front-facing offal to side offal. And so it gives this illusion that it's actually a three-dimensional object, crude though it is because it switches at quite abrupt angles. And this is something that games of yore did, but generally they tried to get away with depicting stuff from as few angles as possible. And Prodeus has a lot more. It not only depicts things from at least like I don't know 8 horizontal directions, but it also has multiple levels of elevation, so you can actually stand over the offal and look down at it. So that's one thing. The other thing is that these sprites are lit as though the contours of the creatures were reflecting light from sources within the room. You know, like a 3D model would. So, so at first I thought this was just crazy, crazy good normal mapping. And normal mapping is when you take like a 2D texture and then you tell the engine how to light it pixel by pixel. I'm sorry, my cat is yelling at me. She has opinions about Proteus. Um, and you do that by you tell the engine how to light this 2D piece of texture by using a separate texture called a normal map, which is the same size as the original texture, but instead of showing each pixel, like each pixel is the different color of a demon's flesh, it's assigning a color to that pixel which represents an angle, so that when the engine lights the original texture from the left, it checks with the normal map and it says, oh, okay, so this pixel is actually angled towards the light, and then it lights the original pixel that little bit brighter as though it was facing the light. And there's all kinds of other maps that that work in similar ways, that assign levels of shininess to a pixel, for example, and so forth. But it's really notable that Prodeus, these 2D pixelated sprites are just insanely well lit and really reactive to lights. And They can get like spattered with gloop and blood, and enemies can lose entire limbs, and there's still a whole extra animations for that, and all this other stuff. So I was really curious to how they did all this, and the answer is that they didn't. Jamie, what they did is weirdly both a shortcut, but also way more complicated. So, and I realized this when I noticed in the options menu, there's just an option to turn off the sprite effect and replace everything with 3D models, because this isn't a sprite based game at all. It's a fully 3D game. And the sprites you're seeing are, in fact, the 3D models being rendered by the game, like in situ with all the lighting interactions that would normally happen. But then they are somehow outputted as a flat plane. Which is it's mad. Like it's like the game has done all this work to render these things in real time, then it's taken a photograph of them and then presented to you the photograph, because in order to look like a more primitive version of technology, it's kind of preventing you from seeing objects from every degree of rotation, despite it being perfectly within its power to render them. And in fact, it's faking that it can't do this by supplying updates to the sprites only at large intervals, so it looks like it's a separate sprite from the side and it's from the front, but they actually both originate from the same 3D model actually being rendered in real. Anyway, I know this, I'm just spluttering like a fucking maniac here, but I just feel it's such a convoluted way to get to that retro aesthetic, and I'm really annoyed at how successful it is. Because it looks great. Is this a weird thing for me? I don't know.
Well, no, I think it's interesting because it makes me think. I was just looking up the quote here. It's that thing that Brian Eno said uh, once, where he said, "Whatever you now find weird, ugly, uncomfortable, and nasty about a new medium will surely become its signature. CD distortion, the jitterness of digital video, the crap sound of 8-bit. All of these will be cherished and emulated as soon as they can be avoided. It's the sound of failure. So much modern art is the sound of things going out of control, of a medium pushing to its limits and breaking apart. The distorted guitar sound is the sound of something too loud for the medium supposed to carry it. The blues singer with a cracked voice is the sound of an emotional cry too powerful for the throat that releases it. The excitement of grainy film, of bleached out black and white, is the excitement of witnessing events too momentous for the medium assigned to record them." And I was thinking of that when you were talking about the idea that that is something that you covet in a game now in this kind of weird, particularly in boomer shooters, but it's elsewhere as well, and even in things like a game like Rares or something like that, which actually has a very similar concept to what Brian Eno was saying there at its heart, isn't it?
Yeah.
And
The
that is
2D imp is too satanic for the renderer of 1994,
yeah,
as he might have said.
absolutely, yeah. So I think it is interesting the amount of, as you say, the amount of work they've gone to create that effect. I mean, I didn't understand any of that really. All I did, I played it for 45 minutes, an hour, and had a fucking great time. It's ridiculous. It's so silly. It's like it's a proper Doom, like a Doom clone, as they used to say. It's really fast. I really enjoyed the violence and the gore in it. It's got that sort of thing where it will put you in a corridor with a bunch of monsters and you'll start firing, and seemingly minutes will pass and you're still firing, and there's just sort of gallons of blood and limbs flying everywhere. And yeah, and I thought it looked and felt brilliant. It felt mad. I felt a bit like I was playing Marathon, actually, the old
Yeah.
Bungie game from the 90s, because it had a lot of verticality. And also the sprite work was quite, or lack thereof, was quite reminiscent of Marathon, I thought. Yeah, so no, I thought it was an absolute hoot.
Yeah, it uses. It's very, very indebted to Doom in the sense that everything in it is more or less a direct analog from Doom. Obviously, the environments are like these hellish tech industrial complexes, and inexplicable toxic slime factories and lava bases, and but like you say, it does have that thing where the levels are kind of large and intricate and clever in ways which are wouldn't have been possible then because of the level of verticality involved. And then the weapons, they're also kind of direct analogs for Doom weapons, but they feel kind of deadly and hefty in kind of very satisfying ways. Obviously, there's nothing novel there, but like I don't think novelty is the game's purpose whatsoever.
No, it just sort of starts and you immediately know what you're doing. And there's something wonderful about that. I agree with you about the guns. I particularly like the sort of dual machine pistol things. Those were immense fun.
Oh, the shredders,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I have to say, I mean, maybe it's a weakness with the arsenal. This feels like a kind of thing you would bring up in in shooter reviews of the era. So it's the kind of criticism that sort of died away really in video games. But I mean, when you're talking about the kind of the balance of the different weapons and how much it incentivizes you to use different weapons in different scenarios, I don't think it's really nailed that. Like I found myself using certain weapons much more than others, um, and kind of relying on them as a crutch. Um, and there's nothing there are no kinds of enemies which demand particular strategies. I would say nearly everything is, you hit it with the most powerful thing you've got, or you wallop it with something that fires really fast, and then it explodes. Um, so there's not. I don't know that there was. The more I played it, the kind of less kind of tactically interesting its combat has become, but it's still very kind of satisfying and splattery.
Yes, it's true, isn't it? That like, I mean, I was thinking with Hyperdemon, it's like what gives that game its kind of glorious rhythm is the handoff between strategies you need to take enemy to enemy. So in Hyperdemon, some enemies you need to get close to and blast with your sort of shotgun blast. Some you need to take out with a special move. Some you need to jump on. And it's the same thing that Doom Eternal, I think, was keyed into really well, where one of the ways that you can make your player feel like a demonic killing machine dynamo that can't be stopped is by giving them those moment to moment switchovers between weapons. And in Doom Eternal, every single gun had its purpose, every single enemy had its different um, use case, and the game was essentially about chaining those things together. And when it was up and running, it just felt absolutely incredible and got you into a sort of extraordinary bloodlust flow state. But I agree that in Prodeus and in a lot of these boomer shooters I've played, actually, they often have a sort of gun switching mechanic where it will just switch you up. Once one gun's empty, it'll switch you to the next one and the next one and the next one. You don't really have to think about it.
It's also divided up by like these ammo classes, and you don't really. I think there's only one kind of mid-table weapon of the same ammo class that I choose in preference to the higher level one, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
So and it's a shame because some of the weapons do interesting things. Some of the weapons do have like alternate fire modes, which is something that I think was it Unreal was the first game to introduce those. I'm not sure, but so it's a little ahead of its kind of retro niche there by skipping ahead 5 years or so. But then like one of this is like a plasma rifle which fires like a very rapid number of projectiles, and you can sort of tag an enemy by clicking on it with the right trigger and then fire anywhere and the bullets will arc towards it. But there's almost no circumstance in which that is actually that useful or desirable. There's a kind of grenade launcher where you can fire sticky grenades, but like the AI is just coming towards you, man. It's like it's not. You don't need to lead them into traps. You just need to blast them apart. I've not found that any circumstance where kind of you had enough strategic forethought for that to be valuable. It's more efficient just to kind of nail individual enemies in the kind of order of threat that they represent, and just keep on moving like a shark around and around the environment.
it's funny because another thing I've been playing recently is Black Mesa, the
Oh
like
yeah,
Half-Life fan remake, which is great, which is really good, and is a really all the things people say about it are true. It's a really loving like tribute and the additions thing. And I'm sort of working my way quite slowly through the early stages of that. But it's interesting to think about like what Half-Life comprised. I mean, it feels very archaic now in a kind of pleasing way. but what it was replacing was that kind of mindlessness of the Doom clones and the games like that, and like the way people remember playing them. And I think what the boomer shooters are all trying to kind of recreate is that feeling of exhilaration and that feeling of sort of speeding through, killing things, and moving on to the next kind of stage as fast and efficiently as possible. And that's also something that comes with the familiarity of playing these games over and over again, and having them exist as, memories in your, nostalgic memories. And I think perhaps some boomer shooters might get a little bit lost in that one and end up like kind of recreating a sort of, because like Doom could be a very frustrating game. It was really easy to get lost if you didn't know
Mm.
where you were going. The levels were, kind of ingeniously, especially in Doom 2, I seem to remember the levels all kind of fold back on each other, on themselves, in this kind of really mind melting way if you hadn't played them before. And like from what I played of Prodeus, at least, the game is just like respawn, right, off you go. You're never going to be further than a room away of where you were when you die. The enemy's health is even still diminished from where you were. It's got those kind of Vita chambers from Bioshock in it. And so I think that's one aspect of Doom, and it's like that these games tend not to grapple with, because they just want you to get in there and start killing. But I guess it is quite easy to find yourself sort of falling off these because they end up feeling a little bit frictionless.
Yeah, it's interesting. The level design does do some interesting things. It is quite um, knotty in the way that like Doom 2 levels were, particularly, but it's not it's never opaque. It's knotty but not opaque. I don't know what I'm saying now.
No, but
It,
I mean, I agree, and actually, it's possibly a thing to praise in that, like, the levels are complex, but they're also intuitive. So you have that complexity, but you're also not too frustrated by getting lost. It's that kind of thing where you move
yeah,
so
you find
fast.
as you sorry, you find as you progress through the levels. I know that your motivation for moving through these levels is always to find colored key cards, as per Doom. But then, as you kind of move through the environment, it is very good at kind of funneling you back into environments that you see again from a different perspective or higher up often. But then also towards the sort of you're never ever lost in this, even though the levels are quite complicated. And I think it does a good job of there's like of changing the environment as you move through the levels, whilst also making it clear where your next objective is. There's this big level which is in I alluded to it before, a toxic slime factory, because every colony needs one of those. And as you're progressing through the level, you are draining parts of the slime vats, you're filling them, and by doing so you're gaining new kind of access to parts of an environment you've already explored. But your way through it is always feels very kind of directed, so you're never, even though this environment ends up being this incredibly non-linear and very vertical space full of lots of different routes, somehow you are ushered back into it in such a way that you always know where the new part that you haven't explored is, and that is actually very sophisticated. And but like you say, also not maybe there's too little friction in some cases. Like, I mean, I think that the friction might come from you searching endlessly for the secrets that are around the environment. I'm not especially excited to do that because it seems like a slightly frustrating form of labor where you're just shooting random walls and hoping that they open up for you. Um, but otherwise, yeah, maybe what you say is true, that it's a little kind of its desire to have you usher you into this fluid murder experience somewhat defeats your level of engagement with the actual environment itself. I don't know. The other thing that's interesting is the respawns, though, because unlike this is like very noticeable in this game and almost no others that I've ever played, is that the respawns are often in rooms where there are large numbers of enemies. So often, like, you'll enter a room and it's almost the kind of monster closet moment that you expect from Doom, where all the enemies rush out. But the trigger for that is actually the respawn point, and the respawn point is under assault. So if you die in that room, you're ushered right back into the thick of it. And that's a bold and interesting choice, I think. Um, as far as the limited range of choices you can make within apiary of the Doom era.
I mean, I kind of appreciated it in that I didn't have to worry about quick saving or saving or anything like that.
Mm.
Like, it's funny playing Black Mesa and how easily you get back into that kind of 1999 vibe of, right, I shot that enemy, quick save, I shot that enemy, quick save.
Yeah.
It's just like very weird way of playing a game that gladly is kind of much less now. But yeah, I appreciated it in Produce not having to worry about quick saving.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the time when the zeitgeist moves on to recreating the retro aesthetic of Half-Life 2, because then they will accidentally still be pushing the genre forward, because Half-Life 2 still remains the best first-person shooter. Am I right, Jamie?
I
Or
think
am
you
I
are.
right?
I think you are right. I think you are. I think you're bloody right, and I think it's about time people start listening to you.
You've also been playing The Evil Within.
Two.
2.
Yeah.
That's how old is that? That's not old enough to be retro, is it?
No. Although it does have a kind of retro sort of element to it, though. So it's 2017, so quite a while back.
Mm.
Weirdly enough, there was that game. Oh God, there was that game that came out recently, which was like a kind of Ghostwire Tokyo. Is that what it was called?
Oh yeah.
Which started life as a sequel to The Evil Within. It was going to be The Evil Within 3, and then at some point they pivoted massively and made a game that looks completely unlike it in every single way, which is very weird. So The Evil Within 2, I played it on Xbox Game Pass, and it's a very good Xbox Game Pass game, I think. It is a survival horror game, and its main director is the guy who did Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 4, so survival horror royalty. And I checked, and The Evil Within 1 is mostly skippable. People generally agree that Evil Within 2 is perfectly standalone and can be played without playing the first one, so I did that. It's great. It's terrible and great at the same time. You play as a hard, grizzled detective named Sebastian Castellanos, who is a man, stressed man, with a dead daughter.
Oh, no.
And who is asked to go into a thing called the stem, which is like a big, this is all in the opening, so no spoilers, which is like a big shared consciousness machine. But the stem thing can kind of go wrong and people's nightmares can take form, and they do. And the first game, it was like a serial killer's mind that was plugged into it. So a bit like that movie The Cell with Jennifer Lopez. And in this one, it's his daughter is the kind of host of this nightmare. So he must travel into this nightmare where a team load of people have kind of already gone and died to various Gribblies. And he's got to go in and rescue his daughter and confront, various demons from his own personality and from other people's personality. I just thought, what the hell, I'll give it a go, because I've heard good things about it. And what I'll say is that I played the first 5 chapters, so maybe the first third of the game or the opening act of the game, and I'm now done with it. I'm never going to play it again. I'm completely finished with it. Not because I didn't like it, but because I could kind of tell that I'd got everything I was ever going to get out of it, and I was really satisfied with the experience. So after a kind of sort of getting to know you tutorial section, you're dumped into this kind of open world Stephen King-y town space, and kind of given a bunch of tasks to do to track down these signals, track down this team. And the game loop kind of reveals itself to you, which is of a sense of absolute scarcity of resources. Like, for most of it, you'll wandering around with like one or two bullets for one gun, and you might find one more for another one. And you can sneak attack the various zombies that arrive uh, on the map. But once you're kind of taking them on with guns, you're incredibly limited with how many you can shoot essentially. So you have to explore really, really thoroughly to gather crafting materials to build ammo and to upgrade your weapons and to upgrade your kind of character. Um, and you're kind of wandering around doing survival horror type story stuff, trying to track down your daughter, mysterious people, blah de blah de blah. It's all very familiar if you've played a survival horror game before, but it's done with a level of commitment to the basic idea, which I really, really appreciated. I really enjoyed how scared I was to fire a bullet. I really enjoyed how much when I was creeping up behind a zombie to sneak kill them, I was really scared they were going to turn around and jump on me, because that would have meant firing one of my two shotgun, bullets and stuff like that. And it's really well balanced to kind of give you moments when you're suddenly quite powerful, in that you've got like 6 bullets in your gun, to then give you a chance to kind of blow some shit up before, post that fight, you're back down to kind of scavenging and trying to put together enough to win your next encounter. So yeah, I got into that sort of first section. I thought, oh man, this is like that game, like State of Decay. This just feels like a kind of blandy open world zombie survival thing, but it manages to be a lot more authored and creepy than that. So I played through that first section really thoroughly. It makes you explore thoroughly. It doesn't feel like you're collecting, nothing resource to fill your bloopy bar. It's actually, it feels like a necessary thing that you're doing, and you're exploring all these spaces. And there's like you walk into a random house, and it throws you into an encounter with like a Ringu ghost, which teleports you to an asylum and chases you around. And that was really fun and really surprising. And I gather you encounter her several more times through the game. The enemy design is really, really gross and disgusting. They seem really frightening. There's loads of jump scares which are really, really cleverly conceived, that made me laugh, with how they'd organized them and how they play with your expectations over what's going to happen when. You often feel like these games have such a strong vocabulary of how the jump scares work, and clearly a huge amount of work has been put into keeping you on your toes and keeping you surprised in a way that I usually hate, but because I'm not a jump scare type person. But actually I ended up kind of laughing a lot at the game and kind of enjoying how much it kind of shit me up. And then at the end of that section is a kind of PT style, almost kind of walking simulator bit, where you're in a kind of horrifying corridor of nightmares made by a serial killer who's toying with you. And obviously we've probably all played through those kind of levels quite a lot in recent years, but like, you got to hand it to the Evil Within 2 for really going all out on that and really making it a reward for the kind of hardcore survival stuff going on before that. And then at the end of that, a boss who is I'll spoil a little bit here of that first act, so skip ahead if you don't want to hear about a game from 2017. But like, the boss of that area is he is a serial killer who wants to take pictures of people and arrange them in horrifyingly violent tableau and display them in an art gallery. So it's all very Hannibal light. But his like disgusting minion is she's called Obscura. She is a woman thing, like a naked woman with 3 legs and a camera for a head, like an old-fashioned Watch the Birdie Victorian camera head, who kind of moans and groans orgasmically whilst chasing you around the level, and is really quite alarmingly disgusting and upsetting. An absolutely amazingly designed monster, and the game's full of those. And once I'd beat her by shooting her with my various guns, and exited that level, I was kind of like, yeah, I'm done with the Evil Within 2. Like, that was a really awesome experience that I found quite emotionally draining. It was really fun killing that disgusting monster. But now I'm done forever with this game and the series, which I felt comfortable doing. There's only so much time in the world, and
Hmm.
I felt really satisfied with the time I spent with the game, and happy to kind of whiz through the plot synopsis of the rest of it on Wikipedia and go like, oh yeah, it all turned out exactly as it seemed in the first 3 seconds of the game. Like, it all played out completely predictably.
So you don't feel like you missed out on any equally horrid monster designs later in the game?
Yeah, like that's the one thing I kind of, I mean, I can always watch something for that.
Hmm.
I think I reasoned that like that wasn't quite enough to keep me there, and it just, as I say, it just felt like a really good game experience. Like, it felt like playing a demo or something, even though it was like 6 hours or something like that, where it just felt really complete, a really complete power curve across a little playthrough. And I think it made me think that like that's one of the things that Game Pass is really good for, actually, that you can kind of play through something without feeling like you have to kind of eat your vegetables. You can just play it until it stops being fun. I mean, that may well be the death of all video games ever, but like for me, then it worked really well.
Do you? I mean, do you in general? I mean, you say you don't particularly like jump scares. Are you generally into horror games?
Just recently, I've realised I can withstand jump scares a little bit better than I used to be able to. Um, but generally, no. Actually, generally, I don't like. I remember playing like Silent Hill 2, and I'm getting about an hour into it and just thinking like, nope, nope, this is not for me. I can't do this. Just like completely noping out. So generally, I haven't been able to. Just recently, I've realised that I can actually tolerate jump scares a little bit better.
Hmm.
So yeah,
What
I've
do you
been
think's
enjoying.
changed? Just the general scarification that occurs during life has rendered you immune to horror.
Yeah, I mean, sort of.
Oh.
I think. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's just like I've had a lot of like therapy over the years, and like I think it's like actually helped me not be so terrified of unseen monsters. I mean, perhaps that is too prosaic an explanation, but it feels right to me. And I was always very comfortable watching something that was like creeping terror, um, but never so much with the shocking, payoff. But actually now I'm starting to enjoy it, which means there's a whole bunch of stuff I've never seen that I need to now go back and like collect um, in serial killer fashion.
And you said you're done with the series. So if there was an Evil Within 3, would you be intrigued by it?
No, it's too silly.
So,
I mean
so
that.
does that mean that you've sort of exercised any interest in that style of game? So, like the layers of fears, etc. You wouldn't be interested in those.
No, I would be, and I think there's a few things coming down the pike which I'm like when we were talking about all the games at E3, and they were all um, uh, Dead Space likes.
Oh
Now,
yeah.
like when we spoke about that, I would probably be like, no, they're not for me. But actually, now I'm thinking, there's a whole bunch of those that actually might be quite good fun. Yeah, I mean, I'll never play PT. That game is ridiculous, but but I'll definitely try some other
Let
stuff.
us know how you go. I will.
I
I'll be
will.
hiding behind the sofa while you do that. I think.
There's no scary games that you like.
It's hard. I used to like scary movies a lot more than I do now. Um, I find them. I'm just not often in a psychological space where I particularly want to be terrorized. I find, but I find games particularly difficult because your participation is necessary for the game to advance. Whereas when you're watching a scary film, you can just close your eyes, and things progress without your need to participate in it intellectually or physically. Whereas games, I feel like the fact that uh, you have to be the one to open the spooky door to the basement is it's too much for me.
I will say that one of the scariest games I've ever played is Minecraft. Like that game has a lot of jump scares in it.
Does it?
Yeah, when
I
they're
guess
like
so.
when you're walking around at night and the fizzy pop man goes pop right
Oh
behind
yeah.
you, that scared the absolute shit out of me a bunch of times.
Sorry, my cat is attempting to get my attention in every possible way.
Poor
she can.
scamp.
I think it might be her dinner time, so we might
Oh,
we might have to call it there.
that's all
Uh,
good.
if you'd like to send us a question, you can do so at questions@CrateandCrowbar. You can tweet us at @CrateandCrowbar. All these recordings are uploaded as videos to YouTube, where you can find other nonsense by us. The address for that is youtube.com/CrateandCrowbar. Thanks as always to our backers on Patreon. You can back us too at patreon.com/CrateandCrowbar, or you can simply join our lovely Discord community, the link for which is on our website, crateandcrowbar.com. That's it. I've been Marsh Davis.
I've been Jane Britton.
Fare thee well.